Hi, how are you?
Good.
Is everything okay?
Yeah,
We got a call. There's a lot of noise coming from your apartment.
they're always calling.
Okay.
Everything's good though.
Everyone's alright?
Yes.
Is everyone else home with you?
Just the babies and my boyfriend.
Okay. Is your boyfriend here?
Yeah.
Can I speak with him?
Babe! Babe!
Investigators say the adults started staying in hotels before Jacqueline's body was moved in a storage bin lined with trash bags, sheets, and even a white powder to mask the odor. Neighbors told police they often heard arguing, screams, and banging coming from the apartment, even calling 911 on more than one occasion. One neighbor said they heard a woman threaten to, quote, break someone's neck. Another reported a scream, something heavy falling, and Carla yelling, stop.
Then months later, in January of 2025, DCF was investigating allegations concerning Jacqueline's younger sibling. In a statement, DCF wrote in part, Ms. Garcia stated at the time of our investigation that Jacqueline was being homeschooled and staying temporarily out of state with a relative. In response, DCF conducted a video call with the person who mother claimed to be Jacqueline, but again, police believe Jacqueline had been dead by then, so it's unclear who they actually spoke with.
How could a loving mother starve her 12-year-old daughter to death while fooling child welfare with a fake video call? In October 2025, police unearthed Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia's skeletal remains, just 26 pounds, in a taped up tote hidden behind an abandoned house, concealed for over a year by her family who zipped, tied her as punishment and moved her body like luggage. As suspects shift blame and DCF's failures unravel, this chilling tale exposes a web of neglect, deception, and systemic betrayal that let a child vanish in plain sight. What horrors lurk behind closed doors? On October 8, 2025, an anonymous 911 call led police to a chilling discovery in New Britain, Connecticut. Behind an abandoned house, officers found a large plastic storage tote sealed shut with tape and trash bags. Inside were the remains of 12-year-old Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia, a girl who had not been seen in public for more than a year. The scene was haunting. Detectives immediately sensed this was not a recent death. The condition of the body suggested that Jacqueline had died long before she was found, most likely around September 2024. Investigators quickly realized that this was not a simple case of disappearance, but one of sustained neglect and deliberate concealment. The tote, lined with sheets and powder meant to suppress odor, revealed a desperate attempt to hide what had happened. Nearby residents told police they had seen suspicious activity in the days before the discovery, a man dropping off a bin late at night and leaving quickly. What seemed like a routine call about suspicious dumping became the start of a homicide investigation that would shake the community of New Britain and raise painful questions about how such a tragedy could go unnoticed for so long. The autopsy findings were devastating. The medical examiner determined that Jacqueline had not died from external injuries or sudden trauma. Instead, she succumbed to severe and prolonged malnutrition. Her body weighed just 26 to 27 pounds, less than half of what a healthy child her age should weigh. Her muscles had wasted away, her bones were protruding, and her skin had adhered tightly to them, a textbook sign of starvation over time. The examiner noted no recent fractures or bruises that could explain a sudden death, concluding instead that Jacqueline had slowly deteriorated, her body shutting down after weeks, perhaps months, without adequate food or care. The level of malnutrition suggested a prolonged pattern of neglect rather than an isolated event. Jacqueline's body told a silent but clear story. She had been deprived of the most basic human needs for an extended period. There were no signs of medical treatment, no evidence that anyone had tried to save her. It was as if she had vanished not only from her community, but from the very concern of the adults who were supposed to protect her. As detectives began reconstructing the timeline, they uncovered disturbing inconsistencies surrounding Jacqueline's final year of life. She had been withdrawn from school in August 2024 under the pretense of being homeschooled. From that moment on, no teacher, neighbor, or social worker laid eyes on her again. Records showed no doctor's visits, no school attendance. and no verified check-ins from the Department of Children and Families, despite prior involvement with the household. It was as if Jacqueline had been erased living in silence, behind the closed doors of a home already known for domestic disputes and noise complaints. Neighbors later reported hearing screams, loud arguments, and heavy thuds coming from the family's apartment during the months Jacqueline was believed to still be alive. Police had even responded to noise complaints multiple times at the Farmington address between late 2024 and early 2025. Body cam footage from one of those visits showed officers chatting calmly with a pregnant woman and her boyfriend at the door, completely unaware that a child's body might have been hidden somewhere inside. The couple appeared polite, even lighthearted, assuring officers that everything was fine and that the neighbors were simply overreacting to noise. The officers left moments later, wishing them a Merry Christmas. This footage, released months after the discovery, now carries an unbearable weight. It is haunting to watch, knowing that somewhere within that same apartment, Jacqueline's body may already have been lying cold in the basement. The casual tone of the conversation, the smiles, the laughter underscored how convincingly normal life can appear on the surface, even when unthinkable cruelty is taking place just a few feet away. For investigators, every new detail deepened the sense of horror. They pieced together evidence suggesting that Jacqueline's death had been concealed for months before her body was finally moved. At some point in early 2025, the family left the Farmington apartment and relocated to New Britain, reportedly taking the tote containing Jacqueline's remains with them. The choice to transport and hide the body in a different city pointed to deliberate intent rather than panic or confusion. The discovery in October 2025 therefore became not just a case of child neglect, but a window into something far darker, an extended pattern of isolation, deception, and systemic failure. Jacqueline's story was no longer about a single moment of violence. It was about a slow erasure, the way a child can disappear behind layers of silence, bureaucracy, and denial. As the investigation expanded, police began retracing every missed opportunity: the school that failed to follow up after her withdrawal, the social workers who accepted a video call as proof she was alive, the neighbors who heard screams but assumed it was just another argument. Each revelation painted a larger picture of how Jacqueline's suffering went unnoticed for so long. Her body had been hidden for over a year, but the truth could not stay buried forever. The scene in New Britain marked the end of that silence. It became the moment when a forgotten child was finally seen again, not as a missing name in a file, but as a victim whose story demanded answers. This discovery set the stage for what came next: a search for accountability, a reconstruction of the events leading up to Jacqueline's final days, and a look into the family dynamics that turned a home into a place of horror. The next chapter in this investigation begins with one question that would haunt everyone who came across the case. How did an entire community, a network of systems, and even her own family allow a 12-year-old girl to disappear without a trace? Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia, a 12-year-old girl, lived with her mother, Carla Garcia, her mother's boyfriend, Jonathan Nanita, and her siblings. Before moving in with her mother, Mimi had been raised by her paternal grandparents, Patricia and Felix Delgado, who provided her with love and care. However, in 2022, after a long custody battle, Carla won back full custody of her two daughters, including Mimi. Patricia and Felix lost all rights to see their grandchildren, including Jacqueline, which strained the family dynamics. This sudden change brought Mimi and her younger sister back into the care of a mother who would eventually become a source of unimaginable pain and suffering. Carla's relationship with her children seemed to be strained from the outset. She had a history of unstable relationships, and her boyfriend, Jonathan Nanita, would play a significant role in what would later become a nightmare for Mimi. After regaining custody, Carla moved her children into an apartment in Farmington, Connecticut, where they lived with Jonathan. The family appeared outwardly normal, but beneath the surface, Mimi began to face increasing hardship. From 2024 onward, Carla and Jonathan began subjecting Mimi to a life of cruelty and neglect. The mistreatment escalated to the point where Mimi was physically restrained by zip ties and forced to stay in a corner of a room for hours on end. Carla and Jonathan would often use the zip ties as a form of punishment, essentially imprisoning Mimi in a corner whenever they deemed her behavior unacceptable. This treatment was not a one-time occurrence, but rather a regular part of her daily life. Mimi's ability to speak out or escape the torment was severely limited by her isolation from the outside world. In the summer of 2024, Mimi attempted to escape the unbearable mistreatment. She tried to run away twice, desperate to find a way out of the nightmarish situation at home. Both times, however, she was caught and brought back by family members. These failed attempts only increased the intensity of the mistreatment she suffered. Instead of receiving help or sympathy, Mimi faced more confinement and was punished for trying to escape. The emotional and psychological toll of this mistreatment compounded the physical suffering she was enduring. By the fall of 2024, the mistreatment reached its tragic conclusion. Carla and Jonathan had stopped feeding Mimi for 2 weeks. She was deprived of both food and water, her body wasting away from the lack of nourishment. The couple's deliberate starvation of Mimi resulted in her death, likely in September of that year. The decision to let Mimi die from malnutrition was not a momentary lapse, but a cruel and sustained form of punishment. She had been a victim of neglect and violence for months, and the final weeks of her life were marked by an agonizing slow death. Despite her cries and the obvious signs of distress, no one intervened, and no one came to her aid. Once Mimi died, the family faced a difficult decision how to cover up their crime. Rather than report her death or seek help, Carla and Jonathan chose to hide the body. They concealed her remains in the basement of their home in Farmington, a grim indication that they had no intention of letting anyone know what had truly happened. The decomposition of Mimi's body, however, created an unbearable stench that forced the family to take action. Unable to bear the smell, Carla and Jonathan decided to move, and in March 2025, they relocated to a new apartment in New Britain. But the body of their daughter did not stay behind. They took Mimi's remains with them, hiding her in a plastic tote, presumably hoping that the body would not be discovered. Despite the family's best efforts to cover their tracks, the truth eventually emerged. On October 8, 2025, a crucial phone call from an anonymous tipster led police to the discovery of Mimi's body in the abandoned house in New Britain. The tipster had witnessed suspicious activity, seeing Jonathan Nanita transporting a large tote and placing it at the vacant property. The police followed up on the lead and discovered the body, which had been hidden for over a year. The condition of the remains confirmed what investigators had suspected. Mimi had been dead for a long time, and her body had been moved from one hiding place to another in a futile attempt to keep the truth from coming out. The discovery of Mimi's body sparked a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. The police quickly uncovered the horrific mistreatment and neglect she had suffered at the hands of her own family. The fact that she had been hidden for so long, and that no one had reported her missing, was a tragic commentary on the failures of the people who should have been responsible for her care and protection. The call that had led to the discovery of her body was the catalyst that finally brought the truth to light. But it was a truth that had been buried in secrecy for far too long. The case of Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia is one of the most heartbreaking examples of child exploitation and neglect. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of family secrecy and the critical importance of vigilance in child welfare. Despite the presence of family members, social workers, and even neighbors who may have suspected something was wrong, Mimi's suffering went unnoticed until it was too late. Her tragic end, concealed for so long, is a profound loss, not only for her immediate family, but for the community at large. As the investigation continues, and as the perpetrators face justice, the story of Jacqueline serves as a call to action. It underscores the need for stronger protections for children, more rigorous oversight of homeschooled children, and a greater emphasis on reporting suspected abuse. Mimi's story is a tragic one, but it is one that demands to be heard, not just as a tale of sorrow, but as a powerful reminder of the need for change. In the tragic case of Jacqueline, Torres Garcia, the relationship between Mimi and her mother, Carla Garcia, is a key factor that helps explain the neglect and mistreatment that ultimately led to Mimi's death. A popular hypothesis surrounding the case suggests that Carla's feelings of frustration and resentment toward her daughter, particularly as Jacqueline began to mature and display behaviors that Carla deemed unacceptable, may have played a significant role in the escalating violence, Carla's custody battle, and her eventual gain of full custody of Jacqueline and her younger sister in 2022 marked a critical point in their relationship. Before this, Mimi had been living with her paternal grandparents, Patricia and Felix Delgado, who had raised her with love and stability. However, in a legal battle for custody, Carla won the right to bring her daughters back into her home, a decision that drastically changed the dynamics of their family life. This shift in custody may have been the beginning of the strain between mother and daughter. Mimi, who had been accustomed to the care and attention of her grandparents, was now thrust into a home with her mother, a woman with whom she had a strained and tumultuous relationship. The tension between them seems to have gradually worsened as Carla tried to assert control over Mimi and her younger sister. This change in environment, moving from the stability of her grandparents' home to a more unpredictable and volatile one, could have been deeply upsetting for Jacqueline. The custody battle, which had already created a rift between Carla and her parents, also likely contributed to Carla's frustration and resentment toward her daughter. As Mimi grew older, particularly in 2024, she began to exhibit behaviors that Carla found increasingly difficult to manage. This is where the theory of growing conflict comes into play. Like many adolescents, Jacqueline began to assert her independence. She likely exhibited behaviors common in pre-teens: rebellion, challenging authority, and the desire to test boundaries. These behaviors, including defying rules, getting into arguments, and possibly showing signs of wanting to form her own identity outside of her mother's control, may have caused Carla significant distress. One of the critical factors in the dynamics between Carla and Jacqueline appears to be the emotional burden that Carla may have felt. As a mother, Carla was responsible for the care and upbringing of her children. However, as her daughter began to display what Carla may have considered unruly behavior, the responsibilities of motherhood likely became overwhelming. In particular, Carla's ability to manage Jacqueline's behavior may have been compromised by her personal frustrations with motherhood and possibly the stress from her relationship with her boyfriend, Jonathan Nanita. Carla's frustration was likely compounded by Jacqueline's resistance to the rules Carla set. Reports suggest that Jacqueline was often perceived as difficult by her mother. This perception might have grown as Jacqueline continued to challenge authority figures, such as hitting her siblings and defying family rules. In Carla's mind, this rebellious behavior could have been seen not as typical adolescent defiance, but as a personal affront, a challenge to her authority and ability to control her children. The sense of being unable to manage her daughter, coupled with the emotional and psychological burden of motherhood, may have led Carla to increasingly view Jacqueline as a burden, rather than a child in need of support and guidance. Additionally, the tension between Carla and her boyfriend Jonathan may have exacerbated her frustrations. A common pattern in abusive relationships is the influence that one partner can have over the other. It's possible that Jonathan, who was reportedly abusive toward Carla and her children, could have further manipulated Carla's perception of her daughter. Jonathan's potential influence over Carla could have shaped her feelings of resentment toward Mimi, turning small misbehaviors into exaggerated offenses in her mind. Jonathan's attitude toward Jacqueline may have mirrored Carla's frustrations, leading them to both treat Mimi as less than human, rather than seeing her as a child who was struggling with her own feelings of displacement, confusion, and fear. In the case of Jacqueline, it appears that Carla may have begun using increasingly severe methods to deal with her frustrations. As the relationship between Carla and Jacqueline became more strained, so too did the severity of the punishments. One of the most disturbing aspects Mimi endured was the repeated use of zip ties to restrain her. According to reports, Jacqueline was tied up with zip ties and made to stand or sit in a corner for extended periods as punishment for behaviors that Carla deemed unacceptable. The use of physical restraints like zip ties suggests not just a breakdown in maternal care, but a conscious decision to treat her daughter with cruelty as a form of control. The punishments may have started as simple reprimands, but quickly escalated to much more abusive tactics. Carla, along with Jonathan, appears to have regularly confined Jacqueline to a corner, restricting her movement and treating her as if she were an inconvenience. Withholding food became a regular form of punishment, further reinforcing the view that Carla saw Jacqueline as a burden to be controlled, rather than as a child who needed guidance and emotional support. The emotional neglect coupled with the physical aggression would have been devastating for a young girl, especially one who had already experienced significant upheaval in her life due to the custody battle and the loss of her grandparents. By 2024, Carla's treatment of Jacqueline had clearly crossed a line. The decision to stop feeding Jacqueline for 2 weeks leading up to her death suggests a deliberate choice to punish and control her through starvation. The fact that she was kept in such a state for an extended period indicates that Carla may have felt no compassion or empathy for her daughter, only resentment and frustration. The choice to starve Jacqueline was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but rather a sustained act of cruelty, one that ultimately led to Jacqueline's tragic death. At its core, the relationship between Carla and Jacqueline seems to be one marked by emotional and psychological breakdowns. Carla's resentment toward her daughter, fueled by perceived rebellion, emotional exhaustion, and external pressures, evolved into a form of neglect and maltreatment. In her mind, Jacqueline was no longer seen as a vulnerable child in need of care, but as a source of constant frustration. Carla's inability to manage her emotions and frustrations led to her decision to inflict harm on her daughter, using starvation and physical restraints as forms of punishment. The mental and emotional toll of motherhood, particularly in the context of an abusive relationship and the stress of losing custody of her children, likely exacerbated Carla's sense of powerlessness. This powerlessness, coupled with Jonathan's influence, could have caused Carla to rationalize her actions toward Jacqueline, even as those actions became more extreme. Jacqueline Torres Garcia seems to have been a product of deep-rooted family conflict, frustration, and an inability to see her daughter as a child in need of care. Carla's increasing resentment, coupled with Jonathan's abusive influence, created an environment in which Jacqueline was viewed as a burden rather than a beloved child. This warped perception led to increasingly cruel forms of punishment, culminating in starvation and neglect. Jacqueline's death highlights the catastrophic consequences of family dysfunction and the emotional toll it can take on both parents and children. Carla's treatment of her daughter may have stemmed from her own unresolved emotional struggles, but it is clear that the cycle of exploitation was perpetuated by a failure to recognize the needs of a child and the responsibility of a mother to care for her offspring. Jonathan Anita, the boyfriend of Carla Garcia, played a pivotal role in the tragic and disturbing events leading up to the death of 12-year-old Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia. His influence in the family, particularly over Carla, is a critical element in understanding how the violation unfolded and how Jacqueline's death was concealed. A central hypothesis regarding Jonathan's involvement is that he exerted significant control over Carla, manipulating her into participating in the abusive behavior that ultimately led to Jacqueline's death. Jonathan's role appears to have been both active and influential. As the boyfriend of Carla, he likely held significant power in the household, which is not uncommon in abusive relationships. A hypothesis that arises from the investigation is that Jonathan's manipulative tactics may have contributed to the way Carla treated her daughter. Jonathan may have pressured or coerced Carla into inflicting harm on Jacqueline, particularly by encouraging or even directing the abusive acts. This dynamic of control, where one partner exerts power over the other, is a common trait in cases of intimate partner violence. It's possible that Carla, already struggling with emotional and mental challenges, was vulnerable to Jonathan's influence. His role in this wasn't just one of passive observation but active participation. He reportedly played a central role in the decision to physically restrain Jacqueline with zip ties and withhold food from her. Jonathan's influence may have created a toxic environment where Carla felt compelled to follow his lead, escalating the maltreatment to lethal levels. There are indications that Jonathan may have also manipulated Carla's perceptions of her daughter. Jacqueline, by her nature as a pre-adolescent, would naturally begin to push against the rules set by her mother, especially after the traumatic experiences of being removed from her grandparents' home and placed under Carla's custody. Jonathan may have reinforced Carla's frustration with Jacqueline, framing her behavior as an insurmountable challenge, thus justifying the harsh treatment she received. It's crucial to understand that violence often thrives in environments where one partner isolates the other from outside support, convincing them that their actions are justified or even necessary. In this case, it seems that Jonathan may have capitalized on Carla's vulnerabilities to instigate and perpetuate a cycle of exploitation against Jacqueline. When Jonathan was first interrogated by police following the discovery of Jacqueline's body, he initially denied any involvement in the death or concealment of the body. Like many perpetrators of crime, Jonathan's first instinct was likely to protect himself by distancing himself from the event. His initial responses were evasive, offering vague and contradictory statements. Jonathan claimed that he had no knowledge of the body in the tote, which he later acknowledged having helped move at Carla's request. His reluctance to admit any wrongdoing at first is typical of those trying to deflect blame. However, as the investigation continued and evidence mounted, Jonathan's story began to shift. Faced with mounting proof, he eventually admitted to helping dispose of the body, but continued to downplay his role, painting himself as merely a passive actor who was following orders from Carla. This tactic of shifting responsibility to Carla can be seen as part of his strategy to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. By portraying himself as an obedient participant rather than a primary actor, Jonathan aimed to minimize his culpability, distancing himself from the gruesome crime. Jonathan's changing narrative, from outright denial to partial admission, exposes a significant lack of transparency in his statements. The fact that he initially denied knowing about the body, only to later admit that he had helped conceal it, speaks volumes about his unwillingness to take responsibility for his actions. His attempt to pass the blame onto Carla is indicative of a self-preserving instinct, where he sought to avoid direct blame for the crime, while still admitting his involvement to some extent. This shifting story reveals a deeper pattern of dishonesty and manipulation, as Jonathan carefully tailored his statements to protect himself while offering just enough information to stay out of direct legal consequences. Jonathan's contradictory statements are not just a reflection of his individual actions, but also a representation of the manipulative dynamic between him and Carla. From what has been gathered in the investigation, it is clear that Carla was not acting in isolation. Jonathan, as her boyfriend, played a pivotal role in shaping her actions. He not only participated in this, but also facilitated the cover-up of her death. This dynamic highlights how abusive relationships often involve one partner manipulating the other, particularly when the victim is emotionally or psychologically vulnerable. Carla's repeated shifting of responsibility for Jacqueline's death onto Jonathan further illuminates the toxic relationship between them. While Carla's own actions are deeply troubling, it is crucial to understand how Jonathan's influence may have shaped her decisions. His ability to manipulate her emotions, particularly her feelings of fear and insecurity, seems to have played a major role in her compliance with the masseuse. The fact that Carla felt compelled to withhold food and participate in the restraint of her daughter, despite the severe consequences, suggests that Jonathan's manipulation went beyond mere encouragement. It likely involved coercion, fear, and control. The contradictions in Jonathan's testimony and his inability to take full responsibility for his actions reflect his efforts to minimize his guilt and evade punishment. His shifting narrative, denying involvement initially, admitting to helping dispose of the body, and then blaming Carla, reveals his manipulative nature. Jonathan's focus on deflecting blame to Carla, even as he acknowledged his own role in moving the body, suggests a deliberate attempt to obscure the truth. This dynamic of shifting blame is common in perpetrators of mistreatment who want to avoid facing the full consequences of their actions while still participating in the cover-up. As the investigation progressed, Jonathan's evolving story was scrutinized, and the inconsistencies in his statements became evident. His failure to fully account for his actions, even after admitting partial involvement, speaks to his reluctance to face the severity of his role in Jacqueline's death. This reluctance to be honest and transparent reflects a broader pattern of evasion and manipulation, highlighting Jonathan's lack of remorse and his desire to avoid the consequences of his actions. Jonathan Nanita's role in the misuse and death of Jacqueline Torres Garcia is complex and disturbing. His behavior, including his attempts to manipulate Carla, his contradictory statements, and his failure to take full responsibility for the crime, reveals a man who was not only complicit in the exploitation, but actively participated in hiding the truth. The manipulative dynamic between him and Carla, combined with the failure of the child welfare system to intervene, allowed this tragedy to unfold in the most horrific of ways. Jonathan's shifting story and lack of accountability underscore the need for thorough investigation and transparency in cases of child neglect and harm, as well as the importance of holding all parties involved in such crimes fully accountable for their actions. The failure of the DCF to protect Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia is one of the most significant and tragic aspects of this case. Despite the agency's involvement with the family in the past, DCF failed to intervene when Mimi was removed from school and subsequently disappeared from the public eye. This oversight allowed the mistreatment and neglect to escalate unchecked, ultimately leading to her death. The case sheds light on critical weaknesses within the child protection system and raises important questions about how children in vulnerable situations can slip through the cracks of an agency designed to safeguard their well-being. The DCF is entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring the safety and well-being of children in homes where there are concerns about neglect or other forms of harm. In Jacqueline's case, DCF had previously been involved with the family, conducting regular check-ins to monitor the children's safety. However, the agency's failure to intervene in a timely and effective manner once Mimi was withdrawn from school and her whereabouts became unclear is a glaring lapse in the system. In August 2024, Carla Garcia decided to withdraw Mimi from school, claiming that she would be homeschooled. At that moment, a red flag should have been raised, as it is unusual for a child who had previously attended public school to suddenly be removed from the system without any formal documentation or oversight. However, DCF did not follow up adequately, and no one outside the family knew about Jacqueline's sudden absence. The failure to check on Mimi's status after she was withdrawn from school allowed the mistreatment to continue without any outside intervention. Had DCF been more proactive in its monitoring of the family, especially after the withdrawal from school, the signs of cruelty and neglect might have been discovered earlier. In fact, it wasn't until more than a year later, when Jacqueline's body was discovered, that the system realized that something was terribly wrong. This lack of follow-up combined with the absence of in-person visits or any serious investigation into the family's claims left Mimi vulnerable to further misuse and ultimately led to her death. One of the most tragic aspects of this case is the fact that DCF had previous interactions with the family, but no one acted on the warning signs. Jacqueline had been living with her mother and her mother's boyfriend, Jonathan Nanita, since Carla regained custody in 2022. While DCF had been involved with the family, conducting regular check-ins and ensuring that the children were seen by medical providers, the agency ultimately closed the case in September 2022. DCF deemed the family environment stable and the children to be well cared for, which was, in hindsight, a gross misjudgment. When Jacqueline was withdrawn from school 2 years later, no one thought to question why she was no longer attending school or to follow up on the status of her well-being. The fact that DCF failed to monitor the family closely after this decision left the door open for misuse to escalate. Carla's claim that Mimi was being homeschooled went unquestioned, and the lack of physical visits or direct assessments allowed the family to conceal the truth about Mimi's condition. Had DCF conducted a more thorough investigation or made a concerted effort to confirm Mimi's whereabouts, it is possible that would have been stopped before it reached its fatal conclusion. The moment Mimi was pulled from school should have triggered a series of follow-up actions, including a visit from DCF to verify the homeschooling arrangement and to ensure that the child was safe and being cared for appropriately. This was a critical point where the system could have intervened. Instead, DCF accepted the story presented by Carla and did not pursue further checks. As a result, Mimi disappeared from view, and the agency did not inquire further about her status. This lack of thorough monitoring by DCF reflects a systemic problem, one that prioritizes convenience and documentation over the actual safety and well-being of children. In fact, the case went unnoticed for an entire year after Mimi was withdrawn from school. During this time, she was subjected to horrific cruelty and neglect, and her family moved homes, taking her body with them when they relocated to New Britain in early 2025. The fact that DCF failed to notice her absence or check in on her at any point during this period is a clear indication of how deeply flawed the system can be. While DCF may have been aware of the family's history, their failure to properly follow up on Mimi's situation allowed it to escalate, ultimately leading to her tragic death. One of the most shocking moments in the case came when DCF, in an attempt to verify Mimi's well-being, arranged a video call with Carla in early 2025. During this call, Carla presented a younger sibling in place of Jacqueline, hoping to deceive the caseworker into believing that Mimi was alive and well. The fact that DCF accepted the video call as sufficient proof of Mimi's safety is both alarming and disturbing. The agency's failure to ask for a more thorough verification, such as requesting to see all children in the household, left them vulnerable to manipulation. Moreover, this incident highlights another failure of DCF, the agency's over-reliance on remote communication methods, such as video calls, rather than in-person visits. While video calls can be a helpful tool, they are not a substitute for physically seeing and assessing the child. In this case, DCF failed to properly investigate and question the inconsistencies in Carla's claims, allowing her to successfully cover up the misuse. The agency's lack of due diligence in this instance directly contributed to the prolonged suffering and death of Jacqueline. Another factor contributing to the failure of DCF in this case is the lack of external oversight. While DCF had interactions with the family, neighbors also reported hearing troubling sounds from the household, including screams, banging, and threats. In fact, neighbors had called 911 on multiple occasions to report the loud disturbances coming from the apartment where Carla and Jonathan lived. Yet, these calls did not result in any immediate intervention, and no follow-up was conducted. This failure to address these concerns, coupled with the lack of timely action by DCF, meant that Jacqueline's suffering went unnoticed by both the authorities and the community. Had neighbors, family members, or even community members acted more proactively by reporting the disturbing noises and intervening sooner, it is possible that Mimi's death could have been prevented. The absence of a coordinated effort from both social services and the community allowed it to continue unchecked. The failure of DCF to intervene in this case highlights a critical need for systemic reform in child welfare services. Jacqueline's story is a tragic reminder that the safety and well-being of children cannot be left to chance. DCF's lack of follow-up, reliance on questionable evidence, such as video calls, and failure to ask the right questions or make physical visits allowed this tragedy to unfold. Reform is needed to ensure that agencies like DCF take more proactive steps to monitor the safety of children, particularly those who are withdrawn from school or appear to be isolated. There must be a system in place that ensures in-person visits, frequent follow-ups, and comprehensive evaluations of the family's living conditions. Additionally, there needs to be more coordination between various agencies and the community to identify warning signs and intervene before a child's situation escalates to the point of death. In the case of Jacqueline Torres Garcia, the failure of DCF to act when signs of cruelty and neglect were evident ultimately led to a tragic and preventable death. The agency's lack of thorough monitoring, reliance on unverified claims, and failure to investigate discrepancies in the family's story contributed to the prolonged suffering and eventual death of a young girl. This case serves as a call to action for stronger child protection measures more rigorous oversight, and a more proactive approach to identifying and addressing signs of exploitation. The investigation into the death of 12-year-old Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia revealed a horrifying web of lies, denial, and deliberate deception among the three primary suspects: her mother, Carla Garcia, her mother's boyfriend, Jonathan Nanita, and her aunt, Jacqueline Garcia. Each of them played a role in the events that led to Mimi's suffering, death, and the subsequent cover-up that kept her disappearance hidden for more than a year. What emerged from their statements was a disturbing pattern of shifting blame, contradictory stories, and an undeniable effort to conceal the truth. When the investigation began following the discovery of Mimi's body in October 2025, all three suspects initially denied knowing anything about her death. Carla Garcia, the central figure and the child's mother, was the first to be questioned. At first, she insisted that Jacqueline was fine, claiming that her daughter was visiting a friend, and that there must have been some mistake. She appeared shocked when police informed her that her daughter's body had been found, feigning ignorance and confusion. However, as investigators pressed her with evidence including the timeline of Mimi's disappearance and testimony from neighbors, Carla's story began to unravel. In her later interviews, Carla shifted her account, blaming her boyfriend, Jonathan Nanita, for Jacqueline's death. She claimed that an argument had erupted between her and her daughter, during which Jacqueline allegedly pushed her down a flight of stairs. According to Carla, this incident provoked Jonathan, who became enraged and assaulted the girl. She stated that Jonathan kicked Jacqueline in the head and dragged her away, after which she never saw her daughter again. This version of events painted Carla as a bystander, a frightened mother who had lost control of a volatile situation caused by her abusive partner. But when investigators confronted her with the autopsy results, which showed no recent trauma or head injury, Carla changed her story again. This time, she admitted that she and Jonathan had tied Jacqueline up using zip ties and withheld food from her for 2 weeks as punishment for her behavior. She acknowledged that Jacqueline had died in her bed sometime in September 2024, but claimed she had been forced by Jonathan to participate in it. Carla's testimony revealed a mixture of guilt and manipulation, suggesting that while she played a direct role in her daughter's death, she was also attempting to minimize her responsibility by portraying herself as a victim of Jonathan's control. Meanwhile, Jonathan Nanita, Carla's boyfriend, provided an entirely different version of events. When police first questioned him, Jonathan denied knowing anything about Jacqueline's death or the tote where her body was found. He claimed he had been contacted by Carla only to help dispose of something near an abandoned property. However, as the questioning intensified, Jonathan admitted that he knew what was in the tote and that he had assisted in moving it. He told investigators that Carla had asked him to dispose of the container because of the smell coming from their previous home in Farmington. Jonathan insisted that he was unaware of how Jacqueline had died, stating that when he returned to the house one day, he saw blood on the walls and was told that something bad had happened. Throughout his interviews, Jonathan continued to shift blame onto Carla, portraying her as the primary perpetrator of mistreatment. He told investigators that Carla was a bad mother and that she often lashed out at her children. However, evidence collected by the police, including testimony from Carla's sister, Jacqueline Garcia, and the timeline of the body's concealment, suggested that Jonathan was not merely a passive participant. Instead, he was deeply involved in the acts of cruelty and played a key role in the cover-up. Investigators found that Jonathan was the one who physically moved the tote containing Mimi's body from Farmington to New Britain, placing it behind an abandoned house to hide it from authorities. His attempt to minimize his involvement while admitting to disposing of the body demonstrated an effort to protect himself from the full weight of the law. The third suspect, Jacqueline Garcia, the child's aunt and Carla's sister, also played a crucial but often overlooked role in the case. Initially, she claimed that she had no idea what had happened to Mimi and that she had not seen her niece in months. However, when investigators confronted her with a photograph recovered from her phone, showing Jacqueline tied with zip ties and lying on a pee pad. Her story began to change. Jacqueline Garcia eventually admitted that she had witnessed the mistreatment, seen the girl being restrained, and done nothing to stop it. She also confirmed that she had seen Mimi being denied food and forced to stand in a corner for hours at a time. In an attempt to minimize her role, Jacqueline claimed that she did not come up with the idea to use zip ties, and that she only followed Jonathan's lead. Despite her denials, her silence and complicity made her a key part of the chain of cruelty that led to Mimi's death. After Jacqueline's death in September 2024, the family's efforts to hide the truth revealed a calculated attempt to evade justice. For months, Mimi's body was kept inside the basement of their home in Farmington, sealed in a plastic tote and surrounded by trash bags and sheets to mask the odor. Neighbors had complained multiple times about strange smells coming from the apartment, but no one could have imagined the grim reality hidden inside. When the smell became unbearable, Carla and Jonathan decided to move. In March 2025, they relocated to a new residence in New Britain, taking the tote with them. This act alone demonstrated deliberate intent to conceal the crime. Rather than reporting her daughter's death, Carla chose to transport the body across town, ensuring that authorities would not find it. Jonathan's involvement in moving the tote was central to the concealment effort, as he was the one who ultimately placed it behind an abandoned house on Clark Street. The fact that the body remained hidden for over a year illustrates how determined the family was to keep their secret. In addition to hiding the body, the family went to great lengths to create the illusion that Jacqueline was still alive. In early 2025, during a video call with a DCF caseworker, Carla reportedly had another child impersonate Jacqueline, pretending that she was well and being homeschooled. This deception successfully misled authorities and bought the family more time. DCF accepted the video call as proof of the child's safety, a decision that would later be heavily criticized as one of the agency's most egregious oversights. All three suspects now face severe legal consequences for their roles in the death and concealment of Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia, Carla Garcia, as the child's mother and a direct participant in the maltreatment, faces the most serious charges: murder with special circumstances, conspiracy to commit murder, risk of injury to a minor, and intentional cruelty to a child. She is currently being held on a $5 million bond. If convicted, she could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her shifting statements and partial confessions will likely be used as evidence of both her guilt and her awareness of the crime. Jonathan Nanita also faces charges of murder, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and improper disposal of a body, along with similar counts of child mistreatment. He, too, is being held on a $5 million bond, although he continues to claim that he acted under Carla's direction. His direct involvement in moving the body and helping to conceal the crime makes him equally culpable in the eyes of the law. The prosecution is expected to argue that his actions were not those of a passive accomplice, but of a man actively participating in the cover-up of a child's murder. Jacqueline Garcia, while not directly accused of participating in the physical mistreatment that caused Jacqueline's death, faces charges of risk of injury to a child, unlawful restraint, reckless endangerment, and cruelty to persons for her role in allowing the maltreatment to continue unchecked. Her $1 million bond reflects her lower degree of involvement compared to Carla and Jonathan, but she nonetheless remains a crucial figure in the family's attempt to cover up the crime. Her silence and complicity contributed to the prolonged suffering and eventual death of her niece. The case of Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia reveals the horrifying consequences of maltreatment, manipulation, and willful concealment within a family unit. The actions of Carla Garcia, Jonathan Nanita, and Jacqueline Garcia show a collective effort to hide the truth and protect themselves at the expense of justice for an innocent child. Their shifting testimonies, deliberate deception, and attempts to evade accountability demonstrate not only their guilt, but also their moral failure as adults responsible for the care of a young girl. As the legal process unfolds, each of them will face the full weight of the law. And the enduring question remains, how could three adults conspire to hide such a monstrous crime for so long? The legal proceedings surrounding the death of 12-year-old Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia have drawn national attention due to the brutality of the crime, the complexity of the cover-up, and the shocking involvement of multiple family members. Following the discovery of Jacqueline's decomposed body in a plastic storage tote behind an abandoned house in New Britain, Connecticut, in October 2025, the investigation quickly led to the arrest of 3 suspects: Carla Garcia, the victim's mother, Jonathan Nanita, her mother's boyfriend, and Jacqueline Garcia, the victim's aunt. All 3 face serious charges that reflect both the horrific nature of Jacqueline's maltreatment and the deliberate actions taken to conceal her death. Authorities charged Carla Garcia and Jonathan Nanita with murder with special circumstances, conspiracy to commit murder, intentional cruelty to a child, risk of injury to a minor, and tampering with evidence. Both are being held on $5 million bonds due to the severity of the allegations and the overwhelming evidence, suggesting that they played central roles in Jacqueline's prolonged mistreatment, death, and concealment. The special circumstances attached to the murder charge elevate the case to one of the highest degrees of criminal culpability under Connecticut law, meaning that, if convicted, they could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jacqueline Garcia, the victim's aunt and Carla's sister, has been charged with risk of injury to a child, reckless endangerment, unlawful restraint, and cruelty to persons for her role in witnessing and failing to report the maltreatment. Her bail has been set at $1 million, reflecting her complicity and failure to act despite knowing about the ongoing mistreatment of her niece. While she was not directly accused of physically harming Jacqueline, her silence and failure to intervene make her criminally liable for allowing the maltreatment to continue unchecked. The charges are built upon a combination of physical evidence, witness testimonies, and forensic findings, all of which paint a harrowing picture of neglect, manipulation, and moral decay within the household. Prosecutors have described the case as one of the most disturbing examples of familial mistreatment in recent Connecticut history, emphasizing that Jacqueline's death was neither an accident nor a sudden outburst of violence, but the result of systematic cruelty and deliberate neglect over time. Although the arrests were made in mid-October 2025, the investigation remains active as law enforcement continues to build the case. Detectives from both Farmington and New Britain police departments, in collaboration with the Connecticut State Attorney's Office, have been meticulously reviewing evidence gathered from the multiple residences where the family lived. The investigation has focused on reconstructing the timeline from the moment Jacqueline was withdrawn from school in August 2024 until her body was discovered more than a year later. Investigators have recovered disturbing pieces of evidence, including the plastic tote where Jacqueline's remains were found, lined with trash bags, sheets, and powder used in an attempt to mask the odor of decomposition. Forensic analysis confirmed that the tote matched those purchased by Carla Garcia at a local store shortly after Jacqueline's death. Inside the family's former Farmington apartment, investigators found remnants of zip ties, which they believe were used to restrain Jacqueline during her confinement, as well as traces of human biological material that are being analyzed for DNA confirmation. The medical examiner's autopsy report has been a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. It confirmed that Jacqueline's death was the result of severe and prolonged malnutrition, not from sudden trauma. The report detailed how the girl's body weight had fallen to 26 to 27 pounds at the time of death, less than half the normal weight for a child her age. The autopsy also revealed no signs of recent injuries, contradicting Carla's early claim that her daughter died after being pushed down the stairs. Instead, the findings proved that Jacqueline's death was slow and deliberate, caused by starvation and neglect. One of the key challenges for investigators has been the inconsistent and conflicting statements provided by the 3 suspects. From the beginning, Carla Garcia and Jonathan Nanita have blamed each other for Jacqueline's death. Carla initially told police that Jonathan was responsible, claiming he had assaulted Jacqueline after an argument, while Jonathan asserted that he only helped dispose of the body at Carla's request. Both suspects eventually admitted to participating in the concealment of the body, but continued to shift the primary blame away from themselves. Jacqueline Garcia, the aunt, also provided contradictory statements. Initially, she denied any knowledge of the mistreatment or death, but later admitted to witnessing her niece being restrained and denied food. She confessed to taking at least one photograph, showing Jacqueline tied up and forced to lie on a pee pad. Despite this admission, Jacqueline insisted that she was not directly involved in the maltreatment and was too afraid to intervene. Her testimony will likely be critical to the prosecution's effort to establish the pattern of cruelty and the atmosphere of fear and control within the household. The legal proceedings are expected to be long and complex, given the number of defendants and the severity of the charges. All three suspects made their first court appearances in New Britain Superior Court in October 2025, where they were formally charged and arraigned. The court denied requests for lower bail amounts for Carla and Jonathan, citing the danger they posed to the community and the risk of flight. Both suspects remain in custody at the Connecticut State Correctional Facility as they await pre-trial hearings. The state attorney's office has confirmed that it intends to pursue maximum sentencing under Connecticut law. Prosecutors are preparing to present extensive forensic evidence, including digital communications between the suspects, purchase records, and testimonies from witnesses who interacted with the family before Jacqueline's disappearance. The case is expected to proceed to trial in 2026, pending further evidence review and psychological evaluations of the defendants. The case has sparked widespread outrage across Connecticut and beyond. The brutality of the crime, combined with the systemic failures of child protective services, has led to public demands for accountability, not only from the suspects but also from the DCF, which had prior contact with the family. Legislators have already begun discussing reforms to strengthen child welfare oversight, including a proposal dubbed Mimi's Law, which would require mandatory in-person welfare checks for all homeschooled children and regular follow-ups for families previously monitored by DCF. Outside the courthouse, community members have gathered at vigils holding signs that read, "Justice for Mimi" and "Protect our children." The case has become emblematic of the need for systemic reform, reminding the public of the devastating consequences when warning signs of maltreatment are ignored. As the investigation continues, the full truth behind Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia's death is still coming to light. The three suspects, Carla Garcia, Jonathan Nanita, and Jacqueline Garcia, now face years, if not life sentences, behind bars for their roles in her death and the cover-up that followed. While justice slowly unfolds in the courtroom, the lasting question remains: how could so many people, including family members and social service agencies, fail to protect a child so clearly in danger? The legal battle may bring accountability to those directly involved, but the deeper challenge lies in ensuring that no other child suffers a fate like Mimi's again. The tragic death of 12-year-old Jacqueline, Mimi, Torres Garcia stands as one of the most heartbreaking reminders of how vulnerable children can be when systems fail and communities stay silent. Yet, amid the grief and outrage, her story also serves as a powerful call to action, a moment for society to reflect, learn, and commit to doing better. It is a lesson about responsibility, compassion, and the need for vigilance in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Jacqueline's story must not end with sorrow alone. It must become a catalyst for change that saves lives in the future. At its heart, this case reveals the devastating consequences that occur when a child's cries for help go unheard. Jacqueline's life could have been saved had stronger protections, oversight, and community awareness been in place. The lesson here is clear. Protecting children from violence and maltreatment is not solely the duty of parents or government agencies. It is a shared responsibility that belongs to all of us. Every teacher, neighbor, healthcare worker, and citizen has a role to play in safeguarding the innocence and safety of children in their communities. Children depend entirely on the adults around them, not only for their physical needs, but also for their emotional and psychological safety. When those trusted to care for them become the source of harm, society must step in without hesitation. Jacqueline's suffering went unnoticed for far too long, despite warning signs that something was wrong. This tragedy underscores the urgent need for stronger communication and cooperation between schools, child welfare agencies, and local communities. One of the most positive outcomes that can emerge from Jacqueline's case is renewed vigilance within communities. Maltreatment often hides behind closed doors, concealed by fear, manipulation, and silence. That silence must be broken. If something seems wrong, a child repeatedly absent from school, visible signs of neglect, or distressing sounds coming from a home, people must feel empowered to report it. It is always better to raise a false alarm than to ignore a potential tragedy. Communities must learn to recognize the signs of mistreatment and neglect, and to act quickly and decisively. This means strengthening public education about what constitutes maltreatment, how to report it, and how to support victims. It also means changing the culture of hesitation and fear that often prevents people from getting involved. Reporting suspected mistreatment is not interference, it is protection. Jacqueline's death has inspired many in Connecticut and across the country to push for reform and greater accountability. Her name has already become a symbol of change, with lawmakers discussing new legislation known as Mimi's Law. This proposed law would require mandatory in-person welfare checks for homeschooled children and greater oversight for families previously investigated by child welfare agencies. It aims to ensure that no child, like Jacqueline, can disappear from the system without anyone noticing. The failure of the DCF in Jacqueline's case highlights a painful but necessary truth. No system is perfect, but systems can evolve. DCF's shortcomings should not be seen only as a point of blame, but as an opportunity for reform. Stronger internal oversight, better training for caseworkers, and improved data sharing between schools, social services, and law enforcement can all help prevent similar tragedies. There must be clear policies ensuring that when a child is withdrawn from school, an in-person welfare check is conducted within days, not months or never. Virtual visits and video calls, while convenient, should never replace the importance of seeing and speaking directly with a child. Furthermore, caseloads for child protection workers must be reduced so they can dedicate adequate attention to each family under supervision. It is also vital to establish accountability within these institutions. When agencies make mistakes, they must be transparent about what went wrong and commit to learning from those failures. A system that protects children must not only react to crises, but also prevent them through proactive engagement, consistent follow-up, and collaboration across departments. Beyond policy reform, this tragedy highlights the importance of building stronger communities that are attuned to the needs of children. Every person, regardless of occupation, can be a protector. Schools, churches, local organizations, and neighbors can all serve as early warning systems when something feels off. By creating community awareness programs focused on child safety, we can equip more people with the knowledge and confidence to act when a child might be in danger. Families also play a vital role in prevention. Parents and caregivers need access to mental health resources, parenting support, and education about positive discipline methods. Many cases of child maltreatment stem from cycles of trauma, poverty, or mental illness that go untreated. Breaking these cycles requires compassion, not just punishment. A society that prioritizes family support and emotional well-being can help prevent harmful situations before they start. Community outreach programs, mentorship initiatives, and school-based counseling can also make a difference. When children have trusted adults outside their immediate family to turn to, they are more likely to seek help when something is wrong. Jacqueline's story reminds us that sometimes a single act of concern, a teacher's question, a neighbor's phone call, or a social worker's visit, can be the difference between life and death. While the details of Jacqueline's death are heartbreaking, her legacy can be one of hope and transformation. Her story has already sparked public dialogue about how to prevent future tragedies. Across Connecticut, vigils, community meetings, and advocacy groups have formed, uniting under one message: no more silence, no more lost children. Moving forward, society must channel grief into purpose. Every tragedy offers an opportunity to improve, to act, and to reaffirm our shared humanity. We must build systems rooted in empathy, accountability, and vigilance, systems that not only respond to maltreatment, but actively prevent it. we must empower professionals and community members alike to recognize the signs of suffering and take swift, compassionate action. The responsibility does not lie solely with the government, it lies with all of us. Whether it's reporting a concern, supporting struggling families, volunteering with child advocacy groups, or simply staying alert to the welfare of children in our neighborhoods, every action matters. Jacqueline, Mimi. Torres Garcia's story is a tragedy that should never have happened, but it must not be in vain. Her death shines a painful light on the cracks in our system and the apathy that too often allows vulnerable children to disappear unnoticed. Yet, within this darkness lies the potential for change. Her story teaches us that protecting children requires collective effort, courage, and compassion. It reminds us that behind every closed door, there may be a child who needs help, and that silence is the greatest ally of maltreatment. By standing together, reforming our systems, and nurturing communities built on awareness and empathy, we can honor Jacqueline's memory in the most meaningful way possible. By ensuring that no other child endures what she did, her name now stands as a reminder of both what was lost and what must never be repeated. Let Jacqueline's story ignite change, not just in policy, but in every heart that hears it. Because every child deserves to grow up safe, loved, and free from fear.